Terror on the Tube.
Hello and welcome to Terror on the Tube, where we watch and discuss horror and suspense made for TV movies from the 70s, 80s, and now twice from the 90s. I am Gil Manjola. My co-hosts are Pumpkinhead Peter.
Hello.
And the horror unicorn, a.k.a. Allyson.
Hello.
That was a little ditzy there.
I was putting a little, something different on it. I'm trying to mix things up around here. So we are covering for this episode the Norliss Tapes from 1973.
Yep.
A movie that I have heard of. Full disclosure, I had at least heard the title before. I knew nothing about. Nada. And I definitely didn't know it was a Dan Curtis joint, although I'm sure we'll get into all that as we progress into this.
We should.
Yes, we should. But before we do, Peter, do you happen to have a synopsis?
Hang on.
Okay.
Hang on. God. Oops, I almost swore there. There you go. Let's see. Norliss Tapes. It was released originally on NBC on Wednesday, February 21st in 1973. And the storyline is, or the synopsis is, a newspaper publisher listens to the personal tapes of investigative reporter David Norliss, who has disappeared during an investigation. The tapes tell the story of that investigation, involving a recent widow whose late husband has been seen working in his private studio. Okay, that was kind of a weird sentence to end like that. As Norliss and the widow investigate, they unravel a plot involving Voodoo and the Walking Dead.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's not wrong.
Yeah, no.
So before we get too deep into this discussion, let everybody know here that if you're listening to this, the audio only version, there is a video version as well. So if you want to go over to Mom and Pop Video Shop on YouTube, just search Mom and Pop Video Shop will come up. And there is a podcast dedicated playlist for Terror on the Tube there now. So be sure to go there. Be sure to, like, share, subscribe, yada, yada, and leave comments because, we love to know your thoughts about these wacky TV movies that we cover. So we will now begin the discussion of the Norliss Tapes. Allyson.
It's almost like this is scripted. We will now begin.
we will now begin. Yes, no, it's definitely not that fancy. Allyson, to kick it over to you to start with, as our resident closest thing we've got to a made for TV movie expert.
Aficionado.
Yes, that sounds nicer. Expert sounds Yeah, aficionado. Had you seen this one before?
Yeah, I've seen it a couple times.
Okay. All right. I felt like you probably would. That was as soon as I saw who was in it and who it was made by, I'm like, there's no way Allyson hasn't seen this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, and if you've seen it a couple of times, then I'm going to assume you don't hate it.
No, not at all. It's not one of my top favorites, but it's definitely one I like.
Okay. All right. And Peter, what about you? Had you seen this movie before?
No. I've heard of it.
You had heard of it. Okay.
Yeah. But never seen it before. Not as far as I remember. I may have seen snippets of it because, well, the guy who's actually in the background here on the video looked familiar. So maybe I've seen that one.
Okay. And correct me if I'm wrong. This was originally a pilot movie, kind of like when we did Vampire way back when. We've done a couple of these. Yeah. So I could totally see what the setup was, that it was going to essentially be every tape they go through would be a different scary story every week. And
I like that premise, actually.
I like it too. Too, but there is a key flaw in this whole thing that I'm sure we'll get to at some point. But I do like that. I do see how, though, over time, I would presume the arc of the entire show, though, would be what happened to Norliss, right? He just disappears. Obviously each tape is gradually revealing his descent further and further from presumably a Mulder, rather a Scully, into becoming more of a Mulder, right? He goes.
If you think about it, the way he acts at the start of this movie doesn't really fit how he acts at the end of the movie. But then you think, oh, wait a minute, this is not the investigation he disappeared on. That probably comes later because he's more, gonna use a fancy word, disheveled, I suppose, more like something's really after him.
When we first see him, you mean at the beginning of the show?
Yeah. So, and that I'm sure would be revealed as the show progressed.
Yes. No, I just got to get this out of the way now. So Angie Dickinson is in this as well. Claude Rains, I believe, is also in this.
Akins.
Oh, Akins. I said Rains. I meant Akins. My bad. Wrong Claude.
Oopsie.
I'm actually just make our life easier. I'm just going to bring us up here on IMDb just for the purposes of this. But that's probably the biggest name. Now, Roy Tynes or however you say his name. Is he the guy who played Norliss?
Yeah. I'm not sure how you put it on.
What is he from? Because he is familiar, but I couldn't place him from.
There was a TV show called The Invaders.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Which he was in, which is a pretty good one. And he was actually in, let's see, we covered The Horror at 37,000 Feet.
Yeah.
We covered that one. He was in that.
He was. Okay.
Yeah. He was in an episode of X-Files. Or a couple of episodes.
He was like a short recurring character in the conspiracy episode.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it was in 3 or 4 episodes, something like that.
Okay. All right. So is he like what was he like a federal agent type that was involved
No, I don't think so.
He's like a clone that's involved in that whole alien.
I remember that. I remember that plot line. Yeah. I'm actually planning on revisiting at least up until spoiler alert, Mulder leaves. I'm planning on watching.
All the way up to the 11th episode.
I honestly don't. You know what's funny? Looking back on it, I don't know that I ever finished the last season or so of X-Files because I just didn't like it once they got rid of Mulder and Scully and it became the Doggett and Annabeth Gish show. I just was like, I like both of them. I like them, but
they come back in the 10th and 11th season.
That would have been. It would have been a good show if they wanted to do just some other supernatural show with those two. As a new thing. I would have been
as
on board
spinoff.
for it.
Yep, I agree.
They're great actors.
Yes, they're fantastic. I love them both. But I think the problem was you're not going to replace Mulder and Scully, so they should have done a different thing. But aside,
that's why they came back. And the new seasons, you haven't lived until you've seen the episode with Mulder line dancing. That was an amazing
the one where he takes acid.
Yes.
I watched. I think was that in the second. Was that in the second of the new seasons? Because I think
it was the first.
I don't remember that. I thought I watched all of those. I don't remember that though. For some reason.
Immediately texted Kevin afterwards, like, "This is amazing."
Well, I'm planning on rewatching at least some of them with my kids because they haven't seen any of them, and I feel like
all of them.
They should watch them for sure. Although not the second X-Files movie because that was horrible.
You may be able to skip that one.
It was so bad. It was so bad. I don't even know that I finished it. I think I rented it, got halfway through. I'm like, this isn't. I'm sorry, I'm not doing this. No, because I like the first movie. The first movie I like.
We watched that in the theater.
So. Yeah, me too. I like the first one. I liked everything about all that, but I hated the second movie. Anyway,
so sadly, we're not talking about the X-Files.
No, but this does have an X-Filesian vibe,
and also tying back to the video you have playing in the background.
A Kolchak vibe, but especially when everybody, I'm sure, knows about X-Files, Chris Carter, creator of X-Files, was very much inspired by Kolchak to do X-Files. So this all kind of comes together. So this has definitely got those Dan Curtis vibes. And I will say this, I'm not going to say how I 100% felt about this particular movie yet, but I will say one thing I really appreciate about Dan Curtis TV movies, they're very well directed and they have a cinematic quality that's much more rich than a lot of other TV movies we've covered. Like there's just a level of to the camera work and the composition and the way things kind of are blocked and played out that is much more thoughtful and creative than a lot of made for TV movies, in my opinion. And I will also say he's a good director. And I will also say that I have concluded that even the least amongst the 1970s made for TV movies, I still prefer to some of the later 80s and into the 90s era of TV movies. I think that there's something about them. There was more care, I feel like, put into them at that time than as you got further on, I mean, all you have to do is refer back to like the fact that Spielberg with Duel, like that level of artistry. Obviously not all TV movies from the 70s are like that one, but that level of creativity on some level feels way more prevalent in like late 60s all the way into like later 70s maybe. But once you crack 1980, at least so far, I have not been as impressed that I can think of. I don't think there's any that have been as good as some of those other ones. The Haunting was good. I know it was early. That was like the first one I think we did, right, Peter?
Yeah,
the only other
that was 90.
And that was 1990. Yeah. That one was good, but other than that,
but there are some 90s.
People across the lake.
Okay, yeah. But even then, as much as I like that movie, I have a soft spot for it, it's not as cinematic to me. Like it doesn't. This, if you really go back and look at how this was shot, and just the level, there's an artistry to it, and a lot of use of just, I don't know, wide angle lenses and just.
It was shot differently. You can see the difference between like a 70s, 80s, or a 90s TV horror movie. So there are some good ones in the 90s too, but it's I don't know, it's and the vibe of it. I think it's
Well, there's a reason for that. I think. I mean, it's in the 70s. Most people didn't have very many channels. A TV movie was an event. Like when the Kolchak movies came out, they got huge shares of the Nielsen ratings. So you had budgets and you had an incentive, and your only competition was the movie theater, which costs money, and the broadcast TV with the TV movies was free. So, and you're going to get good advertising dollars because that's where the eyes are on Tuesday night, Monday night, whenever the movie of the week would happen. And you get into the 80s and you have cable TV and HBO and Showtime and VCRs and the video store. So you have all this other stuff. And you also have a direct to video market that's just churning out low budget stuff, which a lot of is crap, but it's crap I love. And so the incentive to put more of a budget and hire good writers and hire, seasoned actors and actresses. You just pick people from TV and you throw some money at it, and there's probably not special effects, and you're using different techniques. It's on the cheap. There's no reason for that.
Now I want to make sure I'm understanding. I want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. So you're saying it's on the cheap more so by the time we're getting into the 80s and 90s. Okay. So, let me following that train of thought though. Logically, and no one can see the air quotes. Well, actually, they can now. What am I saying? Yeah, they can. I'm using air quotes. Logically, though, wouldn't it stand to reason from a competitive argument that when you have all these other things you're competing against, you'd want to up your game and you would want to make it better so that you could actually compete on some level? Because I feel like
no, because I mean, if you compare this to the direct to video craze, you're looking at creating a lot of content to fill a lot of channels and a lot of spaces.
Quantity over quality.
Yeah. So you're not necessarily, that's the thing. You had like 3 major networks in the 70s. I remember when I was very little, my grandparents' remote, it was this brown weird object that looked like it was from the Flintstones, and it had 3 buttons on it.
Did they call it a click? Did they call it a clicker?
They did.
Yep.
I pretended it was a microphone all the time when I was a toddler. There's photos of me like 2 years old singing into it.
Well, and you're really old if you didn't have a clicker, but you were the clicker, right, Peter?
Oh.
You were.
Exactly.
If anyone listens to the Haunted Davenport ever, our first episode years ago, we talk about things that scared us, and I had this whole thing about being afraid to get up close to the TV to touch the knobs when Doctor Who came on when I was like 3 years old, because my little toddler fingers had trouble getting things to work properly. And those knobs, they were a pain in the butt if you didn't have good manual dexterity. Your little child and the floating head of Tom Baker is coming at you. I was trying to watch Sesame Street.
But plus those old 70s Doctor Who's were really unsettling. There's just something about the way they look.
I never got past the theme show when I was until I was older, because the floating head and the music was freaking me out.
It's pretty creepy.
Favorite Doctor? the full.
Tom Baker, right?
Yeah.
Is that Tom Baker?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
Although
that's a Baker.
for me, it's a hard tie between him and David Tennant. But Tom Baker, I love.
Well, I'm the old one here, so I love the.
He watched it when it was new. Allyson, we saw old syndicated repeats on PBS. He watched it like when it first dropped.
I mean, he would have been very little when the earliest Doctor Who was.
Yeah.
No, I didn't get into it like that. I've seen a couple of those afterwards, but but the Baker period, the fourth Doctor was my jam.
That was
so
your
to speak.
jam.
It's good stuff.
Well, okay. Well,
to go back again with what Allyson touched upon, with you had a few channels back then. I mean, this is what is basically the premise of this show, that we pick by random, because back then you were basically at you were at the mercy, and over here you had either was Friday, I think it was Saturday evening on one of the Danish channels, because back here we didn't really have a lot of channels, like 2 Swedish channels and 1 or 2 Danish channels. But you had one show during the whole evening, which was kind of the wraparound story, where you had artists and you had interviews, and then you had maybe a comedy show or something like that, or a TV show, and then they finished off with a movie. And that's what you watch for the whole movie, for the whole evening. They had your attention span for a couple of hours. And I kind of dug that, to be honest. Now people sit like this, click, 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 and have an attention span of like a squirrel on drugs, basically.
It's the paradox of choice. There are too many choices.
Exactly.
I used to rail against the idea that we had too many choices. Like, people, but I now am 100% subscribed to the idea that there's just too much choice, and human beings, we don't do well when we have to constantly decide. Like, weirdly, I think human beings, is a human thing. We like for certain things to just be like, well, and there's something to be said for that, right? Like back in the day, 3 channels. I mean, yeah, you had to choose, but it was boom, boom, boom. Versus what happens to most people, they get on Netflix or whatever they get on, and they're just doom scrolling, right? You just go.
Which is why, and this is going to make me look weird. I mean, I have, and if we take away all the streaming channels that I have, and the online, you have to. I have an extensive library of movies, that people know, and it's like with Dave. There's too much choice. So what I do, I just make lists with a bunch of movies on them, but it's still a much smaller choice than all of them. And then I kind of like randomly pick from that list until that list is gone. And then I make another list because, or if not, you just, I mean, me and Kevin Spencer have had this discussion over and over, and Angela, his wife, just shakes her head at us. You spend maybe an hour and a half browsing through your shelf. And then you realize how late it is and you go to bed and haven't watched anything.
Well, until that proves the point, though, right? We always assume it's just because of streaming, but it's the too many choice. Well, and honestly, if we're being honest, back in the day, like all of us, obviously, all of us make video stores very nostalgic. But that was even a problem with video stores, because did they have as much immediate content in one store as they streaming? No, but when you're still looking at hundreds, if not thousands, of potential titles. And you don't 100% know what you came there. Like if there was a new release and you knew you wanted that movie, you were fine.
Sure.
But if you weren't sure, you weren't sure, I could spend a stupid amount of time. But it was a different aesthetic, right? To pick up a box and to be talking with somebody who's with you, and you know what I mean. It was a different experience than this, where you're just going through images over and over and over again.
Which is why I like our premise here. We just randomly pick one.
What's that, Allyson?
I still occasionally, I'm lucky enough to still occasionally go to a video store. So I go with a list.
Yeah, smart.
Things I want to check out, because it's overwhelming, because they have an amazing selection. And I go in there and I'm just, usually I'm in the back in the horror section looking at all of the titles and being like, damn it, I don't know.
Yeah. That's movie madness, right? Is that the one you guys go to? Yeah. I envy you so much.
The last video store I went into, I was just saddened, because it was like the movies were way in the back on shelves, and it was like it was an aura of sadness from them. And this is like, it sounds stupid. It was like the shelves themselves the shelves themselves. Wow.
Okay, Dr.
sad.
Seuss.
Yeah, we're sad because it was like,
Aw.
you know what I mean? He came in there,
Yes.
no one was there, and it was like, and I don't even know if they rented them out or they were just there. And the next time I went there, everything was gone. So yeah, well,
There is a place, and I meant to totally tell you about this, and I know this is where we need to get back to the point of the movie
Yes.
here. I'm trying to find the name. Oh, here it is. I found it. So in Tallahassee, which is where my mom lives, there's a place, and I can't believe this. Apparently, it's been there since 2016. It's called Cap City Video Lounge. They are a video store. They rent movies. They sell movies. They got the whole thing going. It's been there since 2016. I've been to Tallahassee multiple times since 2016. And I just recently found out about this. Thank God for Lunch Meat VHS, because I got their video stores still exist, latest issue. And in it, the very first, they basically interview current video store owners. And in the very first article, it was with this place in Tallahassee. I'm like, what? I didn't even know it was there. So needless to say, next time I'm in Tallahassee, I'm absolutely going to this video store. Apparently they do rent movies there still. So I am stoked because we have Viper Video in Tampa, and I love Viper, but they sell. That's it. They don't rent. So I just thought that was cool. But anyway, back to this movie. So
yes. The Norliss tapes.
The Norliss tapes, yes.
That'd be a good side segment for your channel of just different
That's true.
video stores you could still go to.
That's true. Yes, I agree. And honestly,
go short
would get
after. Yeah.
Hey, I
There's a
stumbled
lot.
upon one in the back of a grocery store in a little town about an hour outside of here, and it was
that's so
fully
cool.
functional. So
That's cool.
go to Vernonia, go to it's the only grocery store in town, and they had new releases.
I'm telling you now. I mean, I know the smart business model with video stores is to go like Movie Madness. Are they considered nonprofit now? Because I know a lot.
Now.
Yeah, and it's smart because you take out like obviously when it was purely a profit driven business, it starts to become one of those things like, why are you doing this? Because you're not making any money. But whereas if you shift it around to being more of an archive library type experience, I think there's still a market for it. I legitimately believe there is.
Because I talked to my wife about this way back a couple of years ago, starting up kind of a video store where you can still rent movies or sell movies, but have it also like kind of like with a lounge with some comfy furniture to sit down with, have a cup of coffee, maybe cookies or whatever, and sit around talking like a meeting place.
Sure,
maybe even have like a books about movies or whatever.
Yeah, that's what a lot of them do. That's what a lot of them are doing now.
Ours has a screening room that you can rent,
nice.
or there's just movies playing for free, so you can just go in there and sit down. And you can buy
hang
popcorn.
out, maybe rent a movie or two, and take like having it like a hang around the movie store.
That's awesome. If record stores could come back, for the love of God, so can video stores. All right. That aside, I was like, I should cut. This should be like a separate segment I'm going to have to put on the channel. All right, so the Norliss tapes. So Roy Thines or Thins or however you say his name is David Norliss, and when we meet him,
Invaders that I talked about, the Invaders TV show, it's a good show. So
which
check it out.
I've heard the title, but I've never seen it. I noticed he was very disheveled at the beginning, as you said, because obviously he's been through it at this point. He disappears. That sets the whole story in motion. I get the premise, but here's the key flaw I saw in the whole thing. So Angie Dickinson is ultimately the sort of the protagonist of the week, right? She's the one that comes to him for his help, and she's sort of like the focal point. Her story is the focal point.
Yeah, for this one, yeah.
Why would she go to a guy who's a skeptic? Why she needs someone to believe her? Why would they go? Like, if he had been a Mulder and he had been somebody who was trying to prove this stuff exists, I would buy that somebody who's desperately needing someone to believe them would go to that person. But why would, if the whole premise is at the beginning, this guy is kind of a Scully. He doesn't believe this stuff. He's trying to debunk it. Actually, he's writing a book to debunk all this stuff. No, he's beyond a skeptic. He's not just a skeptic. He's a debunker.
Right. There's a whole description of like how he's gone and shown different fraudulent mediums like what their tricks were, and I thought that would also be a really great show. Like, we have the episode where he exposes the woman who dresses up her child as somebody else's dead kid. Like, I want to see that.
You could actually start out one of every episode with him kind of debunking something and then going into quote unquote real case.
And that would have been interesting, but it doesn't fix the problem I'm having.
No, I know.
Which is, why would Angie Dickinson's Ellen character, Ellen Court,
Well,
why would she go? No. But think about it. It's not just that this guy's doing research on this stuff and thus go to him because he's an expert. He's a debunker. He's a skeptic. The first things out of his mouth should be, yeah, this probably isn't real. I'm going to help you prove it's not real. He's not going to go out of his way to help her prove that she's not crazy, that her dead husband is coming back. She did shoot him with a shotgun. He did kill her dog. And what the hell was that, by the way? And so all of that, like, I just don't get, I think that's the inherent flaw, at least with this particular storyline, was that she's desperate, needing help. She goes to him. He doesn't go to her. It's not like somebody else brought him in to prove to her she's imagining it.
I can kind of understand.
It doesn't like probably satisfy what you have an issue with, but it was explained that he's a friend of her sister's.
Okay.
So under the context of like, I can't really tell, like the police won't do anything. They think it's nuts. And the sister's like, well, I know a guy who studies this kind of thing. Because, I could see them thinking, well, what if somebody's impersonating her husband and trying to harass her or whatever? But I don't think it was deeper than, I don't know where to go and my sister knows somebody. So I guess we try that. I just think that was kind of how they were trying to explain it.
Yeah, I guess I just feel like it's the equivalent of somebody is like interested in religion, right? And makes sense. But they're different. They're trying to figure out a religion that works for them. So they go to a priest. They go to this place. They go I suppose theoretically they could go to the atheist house, but all the atheist is going to say to them is, I don't believe in any of this. So I'm saying, like, they're not going to get the validation that she would be. Her character is seeking validation. She wants to be validated that this experience happened to her because nobody believes her because it sounds crazy. It sounds like she made it up, but she didn't. We know she did. We were with her. So I'm just saying my flaw in this movie for me is that he's a skeptic. And now the simple fix to it is her sister brings him in because she thinks her Ellen is losing it and wants him to help her prove it. And that's as it unfolds, it becomes evident that, I'm saying, like, that literally would fix the whole problem, but that's not what happens. That's not what happens unless I'm remembering it wrong. That's not what happens.
No, I was trying to think, or maybe it was as easy as them trying to copy Kolchak, but Kolchak came after.
Yeah. Kolchak is a skeptic, right? And he, right, if I remember seriously,
no, not after the first film.
Not after the first, but I'm going back to the beginning. Hey, initially, he's just a reporter. He's a good old fashioned,
running around with that
working Joe reporter out on the streets. And he at first, he of course thinks it's a explainable situation. And as it unfolds, it becomes evident to him, but he's not trying to necessarily. And it's been so long since I've seen that first movie. I don't even remember, but I don't remember him. Was he trying to debunk necessarily, or was he just?
No, not at all.
He's a journalist. He was trying to figure out what was going on.
He's just trying to figure it out, and then he starts to realize that the police are trying to sweep it under the rug, and he's He's on the crusade of people have a right to know. Like, no matter how weird it is, people have a right to know.
Almost like there was a time when reporters actually had that attitude. So anyway,
I think for this one, I mean, like Allyson said, he knew her sister in this, so that works for this episode. But you could kind of get into we don't know because the show stopped after. Well, it was never picked up, but maybe it could go as far as him being a debunker. That's why people go to him, and because he would be sincere. If that makes sense.
I'm thinking that if I've just been attacked by the undead, I'm already being told by the cops and everybody else I've told that I'm crazy, that I'm making it up, that I need help. I am not making it my priority to seek out the one person who's writing a book on how all this stuff is make-believe and not real. I'm seeking out the person that can help me prove my case. Now, had they established him as not necessarily being a debunker, but being more of a Kolchak, being more of a kind of person, which I get why they didn't. All right, I totally get why they didn't. But I'm saying that I think that had he been more of a character who was maybe he wasn't 100% he wasn't a debunker, but he was skeptical, but with an open mind. Like he's just exploring this idea of this world. But this guy is set up at the very beginning as he goes out of his way to prove this stuff doesn't exist. So I just don't know that I buy someone like Ellen Court would go to him.
No, he seems actually, the way he talks, and he feels almost like he's bored.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of the vibe I got from him from the start. But then he kind of sees stuff, a lot of stuff going when we ever get to the ending of the movie.
Yeah.
But at the start of the movie, I felt like he was very ho hum about it, and I suppose that goes together with him being a debunker. So, I get your
my beef
problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your nit.
And honestly, if I'm being honest, I'm just gonna lay all the cards on the table. This is definitely not the worst movie because first of all, it's well made. Like that's one thing I gotta give Dan Curtis. No matter if you're into his stuff or not, it's always for the time, for the medium. It is very well made.
Yeah.
I even like the writing. I like that they not the dialogue and everything felt natural by and large. It wasn't like super on the nose. I just got done watching the 9th. Well, I don't even call it the 9th because it's barely attached. But I just watched Spiral, the last Saw movie, because I've been going through all of those for Jay because I never saw any of the sequels. And let's just say when you start getting, actually, you know what's weird? I thought I would be like for all of them. The 1 through 6, I actually ended up really liking. 7, 8, and 9, especially, the dialogue is so ridiculous. It's so expositional. It's so heavy-handed. So on the nose. I miss a day. Oh my God, this is a TV movie, and the dialogue is like infinitely better in this movie. And so there's the performances are really good. My God, you have Angie Dickinson and Claude Akins, not Rains, and a lot of other character actors I'm sure could get into and recognize.
And again, the premise of him being gone basically for the whole show, and just as the publisher sitting like he does at the end of this movie, he throws in another tape and it says, and you hear David Norliss voice saying Chapter 2. And I kind of dug that, and then I was sad that there were no more.
Yeah.
I agree. I think the premise has a lot of potential. I would assume every episode would not ostensibly be, or not be the guy, his boss, or whoever. Yeah, he was like the guy who paid him. Right? He was a publisher, wasn't he? Being in his living room playing tapes. I feel like at some point he would have to take the tapes back to. There have to be because the main. I think there would be almost like an X-Filesian conspiracy storyline with what happened to Norliss.
Well,
obviously, that would be something they would explore.
It weirdly, when I was watching it most recently, and the publisher's talking to the attorney and they're trying to figure out, well, what happened to him. And, he blew me off for this lunch meeting after the weird cryptic phone call. I kind of thought a little bit of the movie In the Mouth of Madness because
good one.
You have Sam Neill playing basically kind of like an insurance investigator going after Sutter Kane because he's disappeared in the midst of all this chaos resulting from his writing. And I thought there's kind of a weird connection here.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I didn't even make the connection, but now that you say that, there is a very good one. But
they would have to make a future. Like we actually, like thinking back on it, we had kind of like the same discussion when we did Vampire that early, because that was also a pilot. Supposed to be, and I think we talked about it would get kind of boring after a while if they just went after the same guy. Yeah. Episode after it, so you have to mix it up a bit, and the same would have gone. They would have had to do with this one, but we'll never know. Sadly.
This would have been more of an anthology that has a connective tissue of what happened to Norliss. That question would always hang over every episode, and that's fine. And I mean, I don't know how long you could milk that. Obviously, they felt like they couldn't milk it more than one episode.
It's also funny because now there's there've been podcasts that have that kind of premise. You have things like we're like found footage things. You have things like the Black Tapes or like Archive 81 where you have
which was fantastic
snippets of different weird things that all tie together in an overarching story. So I feel like this has got the roots of a really great idea, and we didn't get to see that fleshed out, but now there's a bunch of different stories that have kind of built upon that sort of premise.
I agree with you. And I also think actually before I get to that, did you guys, either of you, ever find why they never went past one? Was there any explanation, or is it just decided not to do it?
I don't know. I really didn't go into it, so I don't really know.
Yeah, I don't. Excuse me. I don't know the history on that one as much, but I do know there was a lot of drama around turning Kolchak from films into series, and Dan Curtis wasn't even really involved in the actual television series. So maybe there was just some angst over previous issues. I don't know. Like if they didn't get the right offer or enough money, they might have just been like, okay, we're not doing this because we've already been burned before.
Gotcha. And I think it's important to note that this would have been sort of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is sort of definitely in the height of Dan Curtis's. I feel like he is like a Aaron Spelling or a David E. Kelly, like that level of producer back then. Like he was a guy. Now, obviously, his stuff was almost always genre. He is one of those guys, but who actually made stuff I like.
Yeah.
But that's what I feel like he was that level. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm completely misreading the room, but I feel like he was involved like between Dark Shadows and this and Trilogy of Terror and just so many other things that that his name pops up on. It pops up a lot, actually, I think. More so than I even realized. Yeah, Dan Curtis.
Yeah, I mean, Scream of the Wolf, we did that one.
Yep.
And he did The Night Strangler.
Was it Dead of Night? Was that him too? Was Dead of Night him?
Yeah,
Dead of Night was him. Yeah.
And I love that. I love that
Trilogy of
last
Terror.
one.
Burnt Offerings.
Yeah, Burnt Offerings.
Yeah.
It was great. Yeah.
I always forget that's not a made-for-TV movie, though.
Me too.
I
do this.
It feels like it is.
I was actually about to ask you guys, was that a made-for-TV movie?
Yes, I always forget. It's not.
Yeah. But yeah, I always, whenever I see his name, I'm always happy because I know that. So here's the thing with this movie, I found it, if I'm being honest, and maybe it was just the story itself, like the main story, it was kind of boring to me. Like it just wasn't that exciting. It had moments. Had some fantastic moments. I'm gonna tell you right now. Whenever her dead husband showed up, I said to because my kids watched this with me, and I said, "Tell me if you guys were like 5 years old and you had stumbled out and I was watching this and you just saw that face in the window."
Yeah,
that is the equivalent of what you said earlier, Allyson, about Doctor Who and being 3 years old and seeing the floating heads. That there's certain images. I feel like Dan Curtis. Yeah, it is. Dan Curtis's like amazing gift was of creating just an image like that mild spoiler alert for Trilogy of Terror. I won't say who or what it is, but that last moment of the most famous story where a certain character's squatting with a knife, like just that look, that is terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying. And just there's those moments that he was able, like in the Dead of Night when we covered that, like the Bobby episode. I know creepy. It's super creepy. That's what I love about his stuff. Is it always has this
in the window here. Had your kids when they're young seen that?
Oh my God!
Then you ask, "Hey guys, you want to go out and take a walk?" No.
Yes.
None of them are ever going outside again.
Although they're becoming enough of horror aficionados at this point that the second was that Michelle Carey? Was that Marsha, the one that gets she's in the motel room?
Oh,
that's the sister. Yeah.
Was that the sister?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was that Michelle Carey? Okay. First off, am I the only one who thought she kind of had like a Betty Boop sounding voice? Like she sounded very and my kids all when she went into the motel and the whole thing, the exchange with the mama and papa that are actually husband and wife, I guess.
I hate it when people do that.
I know it's so creepy. But you know, it's funny. Like all my kids said, Norman. Yes, he's like an inept Norman. And basically when she goes, then she goes for the shower, and they're like, all of them are like, oh, she's dead. It's like they know that this is just a recipe for dead. But that whole sequence played out was pretty friggin' creepy.
Yeah.
And I think that there are moments in this movie that I loved. I loved every time the ghoul husband showed up. I loved it. I loved the makeup.
Even in that scene where she's reaching for the curtain, he's going to be behind that, but it still gets you.
It gets you because it's right there. Yeah. It's so great. So I loved all of that. But there was something about the main story. I just wasn't that engaged by it. I just didn't care. I get it. It was a scarab. Like I would still be hard pressed to even tell you how this happened. You know what I mean?
I kind of liked the story. I think it's telling that the synopsis is just like, oh, it's voodoo. I'm like, well, no, not even close.
Yeah,
you know,
no.
you see a black woman that's into the occult, and you're just
So they
like, oh,
immediately
it's
assume
voodoo.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
It seemed like kind of a cult background around like Egyptian lore. Like they were
Yes.
very much
Yeah.
into Egyptian
I got
lore.
that.
And which weirdly had its own resurgence in the 80s and 90s in the New Age kind of movement, which I know from experiences in my childhood. But they were like all about these symbols and this, you know, this particular ring and the idea of achieving life. Now the deity that he's supposed to be reincarnating was just something I think they just made up for the movie. But
Sargoth.
I like them. I like the idea. Yeah, that actually kind of sounds Lovecraftian.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I like the idea that his artistic skills would allow him to make this sort of Faustian bargain. So he has to come back as a zombie and create this demonic sculpture and give it life by giving it blood offerings, and then he gets eternal life after that. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting. And then, you know, the fact that he was faced with a terminal illness, and I think people, when staring down the barrel of a really scary diagnosis, that you would do desperate, weird things and start
You would make a sculpture made of clay and human blood.
I mean, I could. I don't want to, but I have the skills.
I'm going to
So
throw
look
this.
out.
I'm going to throw it at you both. Okay, this is now getting down into the weeds of dorky nerdiness and being very particular. But is he a zombie or is he a ghoul? I argue ghoul.
Well, he's
Ghoul-zombie?
Well, it kind of depends on your definition, because it's ghouls and zombies got intertwined because
Romero.
Because traditionally a ghoul was something that ate the dead.
And it was undead. It was undead though too,
but it
right?
also ate dead flesh, was my understanding. Whereas zombies didn't necessarily even have to be dead, or they could be dead, but they were risen, but they weren't.
And they're in a trance and they're controllable.
And they were on errands. Yeah, they weren't necessarily just running around. So Romero kind of put those two things together, and then when his partner split off to do Return of the Living Dead, like those movies, then they start looking for brains specifically. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, it's hard to say. And then he's also creating something that's kind of Gollum-like, but it's he's creating this clay blood vessel for something to inhabit. So it's a mishmash, I would say, of all kinds of
and I have to say too, it's interesting to note that Romero in the original Night of the Living Dead, they never say the word zombie, right? It's all they say ghouls. They say marauding ghouls. So I'd be interested to know, I'm sure somebody knows this, off the top of my head I don't. When was the first time that within movies of the what we'll call the modern horror era, although it's probably the previously modern horror era, did they finally start calling those ghouls zombies? Because historically,
I know who you can ask. Kyle Bishop.
Yeah.
Dr. Walking Dead.
Yeah, that's exactly what I should ask.
If I was going to guess off the top of my head, I would think that they call them zombies in Dawn of the Dead, because
zombie ain't right, because they called the Italian version of that, wasn't it Zombie 2? And then you had Lucio Fulci's Zombie. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, it had to be somewhere in there, right?
Yeah, but I don't know who coined it first as far as in reference to those specific creatures.
Yeah, because obviously if you think about what the original zombies were, they really were nothing like ghouls. They were slaves, essentially. Their brains are taken over, and so
like we covered in
Serpent the Rainbow.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you go back to White Zombie and all of that. They're basically just slaves to do your bidding. So
Yes. And I mean, and on a personal level, I always found the ghoul idea far more creepy, but it is an interesting way that the stuff shifts and changes over time. And, people just started calling, like, now if you say zombie, nobody's going to think of the old school way. They're just going to think of a ghoul. So anyway, I digress.
I think he's kind of like a mix in this, I suppose. And he was promised eternal life because of that scarab ring he has.
Yeah, you'd have to argue. Wouldn't you have to argue too? He has more cognitive awareness, even though he does kind of like the kind of vibe. He's got.
I think because Allyson said, I mean, they mixed in Egyptian lore too, so you have to kind of throw that into the mix too.
Yeah, because I mean, he's making a sculpture, right? So he's got enough of his wits about him to do that.
Human blood. That is just. And it's red looking. It's kind of
red. It's red. Yeah, red clay. Yeah.
So
I like I said, there's a lot about this movie I actually liked. I didn't dislike this movie, and I don't. And honestly, I also watched. I don't know if you watched this version, Allyson, but the creature feature horror hosted version with Vincent Van Dahl, Tangela, and the wonderful Mr. Livingston, who I think is fantastic. The way he treats people, by the way, is how I want to treat people all the time. But go ahead.
I got through most of the creature feature version. Originally, when I watched it to like really pay attention to prepare for this, which was like 2 nights ago, I watched the Newcastle After Dark version because I didn't know about the creature feature version either. Although I really like Newcastle After Dark, but that's a much more understated kind of a mellow version of horror hosting as compared to creature features. And we were out last night and got home kind of late. And so I was, I want to see the creature feature version. And then it's always like 2 hours long though, because there's all these commercial breaks and lots of talking to the version.
That version is really good looking though.
Yeah, it really looked good. Yeah, it looked very
definitely.
good.
Yeah. You can really appreciate the cinematography when you get a nice clear print of this.
Yes, it looked, and that's the thing about this movie. On purely a technical and aesthetic level, this is a high watermark for a lot of the movies we've covered. Now, to be fair, a lot of movies we've covered, we've gotten like the most pixelated, crappy VHS, 3rd generation VHS copy versions. So I don't completely.
That exists.
That's exactly it. Exactly. It's not the movie's fault. But that being said, it still was very high bar that way. I guess I just don't know what it was, because as honestly, to me, when you explained all that about the story, that was far more interesting than I felt while watching the movie.
Well, I could tell you in a nutshell what I kind of think is its detraction is that it's very much following a Kolchak style formula, other than the premise of the tape part. Like, if you just simply follow, you have this character and he's investigating the supernatural, the way it's sort of paced and the way he's bumping heads with the police, it's so Kolchak. In fact, Claude Akins was in the Kolchak first film. So you're dealing with that, and you don't have the charisma of Darren McGavin.
There it is. Yep.
I like the lead actor in this, but he's very dry in comparison, and so it makes the story seem.
My comment of him being bored.
Yeah, it's just not as entertaining. It's creepy. Like, if you're looking for spooky atmosphere, it's got it. Like the atmosphere is great, but you don't have the character leading you through it isn't as engaging and
frantic running around of Kolchak.
Darren McGavin was just so entertaining. Like, I just absolutely adored him. And even though some of the Kolchak television episodes are kind of rough and some of the special effects are
in the background
questionable, and sometimes the Monster of the Week was very racist. So it's just like you have some episodes where they're super cringy, but you still get so much great as far as the performance from Darren McGavin and on the supporting cast, like his news crew that he works with, they're all great. I love the show a lot. And this just doesn't. This is more. It's more of a sleepy, spooky. So it's cozy. Like when you, I think one of the reasons why I like it is because I've talked about when it starts turning into fall, and I kind of want to curl up with a blanket, and I want a spooky atmosphere.
It has that vibe.
Necessarily want to be like jolted out of my seat or stressed out by what's happening. Like, this is a nice kind of I put this in my pile of like soothing, kind of fun, autumnal atmosphere movies.
That's a good way of putting it. Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, and I think I almost wonder too. I mean, we obviously needed to watch it for the show and all that stuff, which is fine. But I think let me put it this way: I liked it enough that I would like to revisit it at some point. Like, I didn't hate it by any stretch. I mean, I've definitely let my mind be known on certain ones that I will never watch again. But this is not one of those by any stretch. I did enjoy it. I think it actually just because I have not watched Kolchak in so long, and obviously, playing over my shoulder here, I don't have an excuse. At least,
by the way.
At least for the that's the night. Yeah, that's the Night Stalker. And so my kids haven't seen any of the Kolchak stuff yet, so I definitely want to show them that. Yeah, what? I know, Peter. How many of your kids have seen it, Peter?
My kids.
There you go. And my kids are still young enough, so there you go.
Yeah.
But anyway, so all of that to be said, I definitely think if you get a chance, watch, in my opinion, watch the Creature Feature version, because I love those horror hosts. I love that it's so classically horror hosty the way they do everything. I also think the personalities of everybody is a great dynamic.
Yeah.
I dig it. I dig it, man. I want a t-shirt. I think I'd have a t-shirt with them on it, right? I'm sure they have.
If you went to their website, there's merch.
I'm sure it is.
I'm
sure it is. There's merch.
Yeah, but also, if you go into this movie, you have a bunch of good actors and actresses in it. So, I mean, you have, like we mentioned, Claude Rains, Claude Akins, who've done a ton of stuff, and like we mentioned, Angie Dickinson, Michelle Carey's also she was in a couple of. She's been in a couple of westerns that I've actually seen with John Wayne. But you go Vonetta McGee. Where do we know her most from? The Madame J. Keel, or whatever the hell they called her in this one.
Oh,
was she?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought I recognized her. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have that I recognize, Robert Mandan, who played George Rosen. He was, I don't know, it's a friend of like the publisher guy. He started the movie.
Yes, I recognized him. Yeah,
Chester Tate from Soap.
I recognized him. Yeah. Yes, I recognized.
And he was in Zapped. Remember that movie?
Yes, with Scott Baio, right?
There you go.
And the guy who was on Charles in Charge with him that became like Bible Man or something. What was his name? Willie. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Oh, what the heck was that dude's name? Willie Ames? Willie Ames? I think it's Willie Ames.
Yeah.
I mean, that isn't a person. I never watched Charles in Charge. So.
Charles in Charge.
Oh my God.
Yes. I am sad to admit I have actually seen more than one episode of Charles in Charge. But yeah, so I would say, and I'm assuming all three of you, all two of you agree that this is one. What's hilarious is because Peter, your voice hasn't frozen up this entire episode, but your video has multiple times, and so depending on like right now you're frozen, you're looking down. No, now you're looking up.
No, because I'm looking at to see if you're right. But
I know, but I don't know, Allyson, if you notice that, like he'll keep talking fine, but like it'll be. But whatever, as long as your voice is going, we're good. That's
the why
his video is possessed.
Yeah, that's what it is.
It's like the host.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I love that movie.
Williams. Yep, he played Buddy Lembeck.
Boom! Look at that. Pulled it out of the old brain pan. Look at that. Wow. Why am I proud? Why am I proud of that?
Because we're nerds.
I know.
So,
what a dork. What a complete dork. Anyway, so definitely see the Norliss Tapes, especially if you're a Dan Curtis fan, if you're a Kolchak fan, if you like actually really well produced 70s TV movies. I think we can all agree this was very well made.
You have flammable blood in this one.
By the way,
a circle of blood. And
I told my kids. Hold on. Thank you for reminding me, Peter. Peter, I love this. So I told my kids, I was like, one of them, because when the demon comes to life, right? And they said, well, that didn't last long. So I said, hey, kids, it's not the quantity of life you live. It's the quality of life. And considering the short lifespan this demon is trapped in a fiery ring of blood, he doesn't get either. He didn't get either one. His life didn't last long, and it sucked the whole experience.
But you know what I also thought about at the end of this movie? I thought, look, another house on fire. Another house they burned down.
That's true. God, that's a pattern, isn't it? That's a very big pattern.
Well, it was just the studio, so I guess that's replaceable.
Yeah, it was. All right, so then I think we do it. Now, here's the thing: are we going to do a next movie pick, or do we just say what we're going to do that ties into Spooky Flicks Fest?
I think
and then
do the movie pick next week. Yeah.
Okay, they do the official
next episode.
Next episode, yeah. So Allyson, I believe you know what we're going to be covering for Spooky Flicks Fest from Terror on the Tube. What are we covering?
We're covering Ghost Watch.
Yes, which I've never seen. I have never seen it.
I love that. By the way,
it's great.
Yeah, I love that.
Spoilers. It's awesome. Watch
well,
it.
this. So I will call this more. This is more of a bonus episode, like when we do these. Where we did what which one? I guess the why do I always forget what's Invitation to Hell. That was a bonus? Wasn't that a bonus?
That was an extra special.
Yeah,
and it was Dark Knight of the Scarecrow.
Dark Knight was Daryl was with us for that one, right?
He was with us for that one. Yep.
Yeah. So we've done a few of these where there are ones that you at least some of us have seen beyond Allyson. So I've always wanted to see this. Now let me ask you a question. I don't think from a content perspective, I'm sure it's fine for my kids. My kids are all now teenagers, so I'm sure it's fine that way. But is it going to freak them out? Because I kind of hope it does. Will it legit creep them out?
Oh, hopefully,
That's
yeah.
hard to say, but
my kids are pretty easily creeped out, believe it or not.
The first time I watched it, I definitely thought about it for a long time afterwards. And when we talk about it next episode, I will tell you specifically what creeped me out. There is a subtleness to this movie that there's like creepy stuff that you don't notice necessarily right away, and then you can go back and rewatch it and you're like, oh, that's
I love that. I love the commitment to a bit, right? Where you are so committed to the idea that this is really happening. And because in real life, when something's happening, you're not going to get some grandiose big thing.
You know what? It's only been shown once.
That's awesome.
Because of what the effect was.
We'll get into that.
Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves. So,
and
if you're watching,
we may have a guest on.
That's right. Say War of the Worlds style.
Yes. So, I think that if those of you out there that are listening and or watching on Mom and Pop Video Shop, be sure to watch Ghost Watch if you can get a hold of it. I'm gonna try
You can find it basically anywhere.
I know it's
now
streaming anywhere currently.
It wasn't. I'm gonna see about. I don't own it. I'm gonna buy it because I'm sure I won't dislike it. I'm assuming, of course, but I'm assuming I won't.
It used to be hard to find the DVD in a Region 1 format. I think there's been more of a resurgence of interest in the last few years, so I think it might be easier.
Wasn't there a special? I think it was a special edition that came out. Yeah. Well, and thank God for my children and my wonderful wife. They got me a region-free DVD Blu-ray
there
player.
You go.
Yeah,
really? Okay, I'll be sending you movies then.
Yes. I bought from Second Sight Films. They're a UK company. Only did Region 2. They did a special box set edition of May from 2002, which is one of my all-time favorites. It's in my top
Blind kids and broken glass crawling around.
That's right. It's in my top 2 or 3 of all of the early 2000s movies. That, Ginger Snaps, Frailty. There's like a few that I absolutely adore. And it was not cheap. Actually, I think it cost as much or more to ship it than it did for the actual. It was insane. But I didn't care. That's the one movie I'm like, I will absolutely. And that was honestly why I wanted the region free player, is I knew that was coming out, and it has all the extras on it and everything else. So anyway, I'm excited about doing Ghost Watch. Hopefully anybody listening or watching will join us for that. And in the meantime, Allyson, where can they find you?
Well, basically here. Or you can also, if you are interested in Halloween and spooky decor things, you can find me on Instagram on Clark Memorial Gardens. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Or you can, I haven't been doing the Haunted Davenport really anymore, but that is still fully available at the haunteddavenportpodcast.com.
Well, all I will say is
go back
when I'm fortunate, when I happen to jump on the grams and I happen and come across one of your posts for Clark Memorial Gardens, the stuff is absolutely gorgeous to me. Like
thank you.
It is beautifully designed and put together, and just everything looks fantastic. It's macabrely beautiful, and I love it. I will
say, if anybody is interested, our second episode ever of the Haunted Davenport, I believe, when we were still definitely learning how to podcast, so bear with us if you listen to that, but we covered Ghost Watch. It was actually one of the things I wanted to talk about the most. That and basically Night Gallery were the reasons why I wanted to do a spooky television podcast, but we had a really good time. It's actually our most downloaded episode, so it seems to be
a popular topic.
Yeah.
Didn't you guys cover, like Joel and I talked about this earlier, a ghost story, A Circle of Fear?
I've never watched that. We're going to do one bonus episode with one of those
It's really good. It was produced by William Castle. It's
okay.
beautifully shot. It's it's very similar to Night Gallery, but without the introduction. So, the first half has a host, Winston Essex. So then there's the second half, which is Circle of Fear, which just no host, just straight into the episodes. But there's all kinds of famous people that did episodes. I think there's like a Jodie Foster one.
Wow.
I
never even heard of it. Like, I honestly,
you can find the whole complete series on DVD.
I don't remember ever hearing. I think you said you covered it on Haunted Davenport, right?
We just did. Yeah, we just picked a couple episodes. We were gonna actually. I think if we revive the podcast anytime soon, we'll probably revisit it because there's so many good episodes.
Yeah, definitely.
I need to pick that up, I think.
Well, it is to say, so make sure you watch Ghost Watch so when you join us, because we're going to spoil it. And
even though if you don't want to watch us or listen to us, go watch Ghost Watch.
For sure. Indeed. So then, I guess wrapping that up, Allyson, I already kicked it over to you. What am I going to do it again?
I do
that from time to time where I throw myself off because I kick it to one of you guys. I love how he's frozen. You froze like this, Peter.
Oh, you're kidding.
That's hilarious. So, I will sometimes throw it to one of you guys and then we'll get on a tangent within your outro pitching, whatever it is. That makes me forget that we even did it. So, Peter, where can they find you?
No, kidding. Well, here, or they can go to Retro Movie Geek, the child care center.
The deranged child care center.
Yes, on Sugar Pops. Or they can go to Forgotten Flicks, listen to some of our old stuff, or read some of my old stuff. Or Hugh's podcast, The Undead Wookiee. Because we have a bunch lined up. We released one not that long ago, Dark Side of the Moon. It's kind of like a sci-fi horror thing. So, and we have a bunch lined up. So you basically there is where you can find me.
Fair enough. I can be found Retro Movie Geek, of course, as well as here in the basement. I guess what I was trying to think, the basement TV room. Up there on the tube, and Jay of the Dead's New Horror Movies in the man cave. Yeah, I it's hard to tell, and this will be ultimately the thumbnail, but our background right now on the behind the TV, I tried to put like part of a movie poster, like they would be hanging on the wall, and I'll see how many people. I mean, it says the title in the poster, but it'd be kind of funny for people to notice what it is. A movie I have a fondness for, as I know a good friend of mine named Terry does as well. But that aside. Let's see where Jay of the Dead's New Horror Movies. Of course, check that out. And for really, really old stuff I did with my good friend Hammond. We did Werewolf the TV series, the podcast, and we did Booth at the End podcast from way. There's
long ago.
Yeah, they're all still out there. They're still floating around the interwebs, and of course, Mom and Pop Video Shop. Where if you're watching this video, you are already here, but be sure to subscribe and like this video, comment, because we definitely want to hear your thoughts on this movie or Ghost Watch. But with Ghost Watch, don't spoil that within the context of the comments because I haven't seen it yet. So that being said, I guess we will sail off into the sunset. And until next time, remember, when it's late at night and you can't sleep, you might find yourself flipping through the channels. And if you do, beware, because you never know when you just might stumble across terror on the tube.